Here she is, the tall ship Nina, a replica of the ship that sailed with Columbus on his first and second voyages to the Americas. She was built in Brazil in the ancient techniques using basically ironwood because that wood lasts a long time. She's sailing in the Pensacola Bay here. Her crew is in period costumes to be filmed for a documentary. Little did they know, a danger was on the way from Hurricane Sally in just a couple of weeks on September 16th. Hurricane Sally, with winds of 105 miles an hour, gusts to 125, came out of the south-southwest, putting Pensacola right in the eyeball. The storm surge of 7 feet, topped with 15-foot waves, rolled in. Nina was docked at Palafox Marina when the surge and the waves wrecked the entire marina. Here she is being forced away from the seawall where she was docked with her dock in tow, basically pulling the dock with her. She was still tied up to the dock, but the wind and the waves were pushing her out of the marina into the open bay, where she was rolling. The crew frantically trying to figure out what to do because they're trapped on the ship. There's no way they can escape. It's 105-mile-an-hour winds, 125-mile-an-hour gusts, basically a 7-foot storm surge, 15-foot waves rolling her into a cove that had rocks on one side, a seawall on the other. Both could have destroyed the ship, but she ended up in the mud at the very end of the cove, luckily, and the dock that she was tied to ended up as a bumper board to protect her against the seawall that was there. Those waves kept rolling in, and finally, the crew was able to be safe. Down below, as you can see, just about everything that could tumble out of any kind of a locker did. The cabin sole is wet. Here are some of the intrepid crew on board. Jeff Hicks, the ship's carpenter, who was injured a couple of weeks later. Kathy Thompson here, she's the ship's purser. She was also injured later on. Dave Zenk, the first mate, who was also, they're also on board were the crewman Mallory DeLapp and Onan the dog. Here's a pan of the ship. Shortly after she came ashore, the crew at the time was still trying to figure out how in the world they're going to get her off, get her floating again, because basically she needs 7 feet of water under there, as you can see. As you look all alongside, you can see the dock that she was tied to, acting as a bumper board, but she needs 7 feet of water, and she was sitting in the mud in a cove that only had 2 feet of water. Here, Kathy is working on the mast wedges, which would need to be removed to pull the masts off. Tragically, she's in a coma because of an accident on her sister ship, the Pinta, a couple of weeks later. When she and some other crew were taking that ship up the river to escape the next hurricane that they were dodging. Here, you can see Dave Zenk was pointing down below at the damage, and you can see the sailboat that ended up next to it also was wrecked, and a long pan of the dock that held the ship and saved it, so it wouldn't be crushed against the seawall. Here's the crew, the Valiant crew: Kathy Thompson, Jeff Hicks, Dave Zenk, and Mallory DeLapp, and of course, Onan the dog. All 5 were on board as the ship was in the process of being in danger and possibly being destroyed. And here's a pan a couple of days later as they're starting to prepare, because the first thing they needed to do were take the masts off so that they could lighten the ship and possibly figure out somehow to get her back in the water. At this particular time, they really didn't know how they were going to do that, because that rig is heavy. But she was sitting, as you can see here, in the mud. And high and dry. And the trick was to somehow get her back to the water, and we'll find out how in just a little while. Now, of course, the destruction of Palafox Marina was from Sally. It was unexpected. Boats were sunk, they were crushed, they were still tied to their docks as it all happened. It was the docks that broke free in the storm surge and in the waves, and Sally toppled all the trees, ripped off roofs, and knocked out power for days in the area. The marine community took it on the chin, too, with millions of dollars worth of wrecked boats. Boats forced up on shore from the storm surge, boats sunk by the waves. It was a mess. 105-mile-an-hour winds, sustained winds, with gusts to 123 and a 7-foot storm surge. 30 inches of rain also came down, and this was a very slow-moving hurricane. Sure can cause a lot of damage. So, of course, the first thing we had to do was pull the masts, which involved cranes to lighten the ship. The masts were then sent back to where the ship is berthed, and finally, the crane is arriving on the barge, and everybody was really happy as they look out from the deck toward where the barge is coming in. And you can see the wrecked sailboat is still there. Here's Jeff Hicks with his injured fingers watching the barge come in. The barge is coming into the cove. The other crew are also watching with happy faces. The barge is going to be positioned. And then we're going to get into the attempts to try and pull her out. Attempt number 1 didn't work. Line snapped. And now attempt number 2. Well, looks like it's no cigar, unfortunately. So, of course, they had to try and pull her out a different way and slowly, very slowly, pull her into a 7-foot deep area that was dug out so she could float again. And it's successful. And everybody's happy because guess what? Nina is floating again. Kind of a naked hull with no mast, but she's floating again. And as you can see, this is the trench the keel dug when it was being pulled off of the mud flats that it was stuck in. And the workmen, who were very, very professional at what they were doing, finally got her floating again. And it was good to see that, with no leaks. So, of course, the next day, we had to continue onward with the boat getting ready to be moved, with a trench that was dug all the way from where she was, up against that dock/bumper board, all the way to the barge. And here she is after they dug it and got her to near the barge, getting ready to put her in the slings to get her out of the shallow water. Remember, she needs 7 feet of water, and she was only in 2 foot of water where there you see the water. So they're digging around the bow and they're digging around the stern to try and deepen it, because then they have to have room to put the slings, as you can see here, around underneath the hull, so that of course the crane can eventually pick her up and they could take her to deeper water. So here you can see they're getting the sling on the bow area, and it's a lengthy process. I still must commend the crew, all these people who salvaged the ship for the crew of the Nina. They seemed to do it as a labor of love. It wasn't just a job for them. So here she is. They're ready to go pull her up. You can see the crane is huge and straining under the load as she slowly, inch by inch, comes up out of the water, waiting to see her clear. Inch by inch. And guess what? Now you can see a little water under the keel. She's coming out of the water. She's totally in the air. And now they can begin the process of taking her and swinging her around to the side of the barge. As you can see here, she's cleared the water, and they're slowly guiding her around. Remember, she weighs an awful lot, and she's a very valuable object. And so they're going to bring her alongside and then drop her down, tie her up. And the plan is, once that's all done, the barge will back out into deeper water. She will be lowered totally in the water, and now she's ready to go home. Yep, she's free to leave with the barge to head to the shipyard for repair, soon to be sailing again.